Hello, everyone. Steve Wyss here, and I'm joined by Kevin Harper. And we are back after 3.5 years to sounds like a long time, right? Because it is. After 3.5 years, all sports betting podcast boys are back, and we are going to be doing a comprehensive preview of the T20 Cricket World Cup, which is starting very soon in Australia, and it's lasting roughly a whole month. And we are going to have a preview for every single match. And we're starting here with a tournament outright preview. So, Kev, it's been a while, 3.5 years. What have you been up to, my friend?
Certainly has been a while. Yeah, absolutely. Much of the same old, mate. Just betting.
Yeah. So a little bit of an introduction to myself and Kev. A lot of people will know me for my work on football, at Twitter at Meatman Soccer, French football, Norwegian football, worldwide football, several other things. I'm not a cricket expert as such. That's more Kev's field. I will be having some picks throughout the tournament, though. Obviously, I am, I do dabble my hand in cricket betting as well. Kev is a general sports expert, and cricket is one of your best specialities, Kev. Where can we find you? You've got a website. Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. www.kevsatsportsbets.com. You'll find all of my cricket bets, both on this tournament and any other tournaments that are running over the course of the 12 months. Usually most of the major T20 tournaments I cover.
Yeah. So, well, we're going to get started now on this T20 World Cup, and we've got some outright previews for you here, outright picks as well. And I just want to mention about the staking system we've got going throughout this whole tournament. It will be a varied staking show between 0 and 10. With 10, a 10 unit pick will be the highest amount of units we will have on any single bet. The lowest we would have is, I'm guessing, half a unit, maybe a quarter of a unit on very special occasions. But so that's just to let you know. Obviously, we're aiming, every single pick will be listed on here, and we are aiming for a strong profit throughout the whole tournament. But the T20 World Cup, Kev, I'm sure there's some people listening who might know nothing about cricket whatsoever, but they're very interested in betting and they want to make some money. But cricket, there's loads of different forms of cricket now. We've even got things like the 100 going on. So just explain to us what this particular World Cup format is all about.
Okay, so you're looking at the 20 over format, Steve, which means that each innings bats and bowls for 20 overs per match. There are very different nuances within the tournament. This one is just pretty much straightforward. The first 6 overs is what they call a power play. So the fielding team can only have 2 fielders more than 30 yards from the bat. So basically, in those first 6 overs, teams will look to get on with it with the bat. The best bowlers will bowl, try and restrict the opposition in those 6 overs. And then obviously the best bowlers will come back at the end of the innings, where batsmen are trying to maximise all the deliveries that are left. We've got what I think is the best format for this tournament, actually. Eventually, the tournament will be 2 groups of 6. 4 teams are already in each group. They were the top 8 sides from the T20 World Cup in Dubai last year. And there are 4 spaces still available, and they will be filled in this initial stage of the tournament by 2 groups of 4, and the top 2 from each go into those 2 main groups for what we'll call the main draw. This first stage is kind of a preliminary draw to get into the main draw. So you've got the teams that didn't get into the main draw last year, and the 2 teams that finished in the bottom 2 last year have had to go into this first round this year. So you kind of got a mixture of improving sides and sides that are on the decline in this first stage, and the supposed best T20 teams, they're all waiting for them in the second round.
The power play, it's just the first 6 overs. There's no additional power play these days.
Yeah, just the first 6 overs. I mean, if you follow things like the Big Bash that will follow this tournament, you'll get all sorts of crazy things like 2 over power surges and all of that, or and things like that. But no, simply in this one, just the first 6 overs, power play, 2 fielders outside the circle. The one thing I should say is a new rule to this to international cricket now is you have a certain amount of time to bowl your overs. For this tournament, I think it's an hour and a half. If you haven't bowled, or you're not in position to bowl that last over by the time that the time ticks round, you then have to bring a fielder back inside within 30 yards of the bat. So in essence, you basically lose cover around the boundary for however many overs you've not bowled. So basically, you need to get on with it.
Get on with it. Get on with the game quickly. So, yes, and there's, the format is. This is why I was debating how we're going to do the preview shows. We are going to have 2 separate preview shows for Group A and Group B, and then we're also going to have a completely separate preview show next week on the 8 teams that are already qualified, individual team bets for those 8 teams. But this particular outright preview show now, we're going to be talking about all the main, what I'd call main test playing nations. And that does include Sri Lanka and West Indies. They're going to get a real loving actually over the next couple of days because they're involved so heavily. We're also going to talk about top batsmen and top bowlers and any other outright side bets coming up. So this World Cup is hosted in Australia, and for those watching, listening, who don't know an awful lot about cricket, conditions very much matter in this sport. Like a match in India plays very differently to a match in the West Indies or a match in England, as opposed to Australia as well. What are the general cricketing conditions that we've got to be wary of in Australia?
Usually, you'd say in Australia, the pace and bounce in the pitches is the most important thing. There's 3 things to look for when you're betting or when you're watching T20 cricket, Steve. Sides of the ground. Obviously, the smaller the ground, the easier it is to hit sixes. The smaller grounds tend to be in Asia. There aren't many small grounds in Australia. We're looking at big grounds here. Then you have to look at the pitch. Is it going to spin, or is it most likely to play for the batsman, or will it seam and will the bowlers be in, the quick bowlers be in play? In Australia, the quick bowlers tend to be the ones that profit the most, but the batsmen are going to enjoy conditions here. And then the third thing to consider, climate. Usually in Australia that ain't a problem, but don't forget this is October. Tournament starts on October the 16th. That's not Australian summer. That's probably the end of their spring. And I'm sure if you've watched the news, you'll know that on the east coast at the moment in New South Wales, Melbourne area, there's flooding. So there is a lot of rain around in Australia. So we're going to have to dodge some rain in the early part of the tournament.
We'll get to that when we do the individual matches. Certainly, weather forecast is a big thing in cricket. So let's get going then. And I'm going to put up on screen now the odds to win the T20 Cricket World Cup outright. And as we can see, Australia are the favourites, joint favourites with England. Then we've got India, South Africa, and we go all the way down to Netherlands and UAE, who are 2,000 to 1. We are going to start in betting order, actually, in favourite order, and we're going to start with Australia. So you are basically going to tell us a bit about each team. You do have a couple of outright picks, who I'm actually, you can say them now. What are the 2 outright picks to win the Cricket World Cup?
Well, I'm not a favourite backer, as you know, Steve, but I really can't see past Australia winning this tournament. I'll go on to reasons shortly, but you can get 3 to 1 on them winning the tournament. They are the defending champions. They won the tournament in conditions that are completely alien to them, and they're 3 to 1 to win the tournament. I think they're my strongest outright bet at 3 points. And
you've got an outsider, haven't you?
I also like a little saver on Sri Lanka, a side who blitzed the first stage of the competition last year, admittedly in conditions that will suit them, but kind of struggled in the second part when they got in amongst the big boys. That was a bit of a surprise, but they did have injuries to a couple of bowlers. Since then, they've won the Asia Cup. That's a tournament that included India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. A lot of teams that they're going to come up against, hopefully, if they get into the second stage of this tournament. And you can get 25 to 1 on those. You would probably tell me that Sri Lanka wouldn't go well in Australian conditions, but they played a T20 series in Australia at the start of the year. They lost it 3-1 with a tie, but 2 of the 3 defeats were very, very, very close. And that's the thing in T20. Because of the shortness of the matches, the fewer the balls, the closer the matches are, in essence. Obviously, there's going to be some mismatches in this tournament. We'll come on to that when we do the matches. But I think Sri Lanka are going to be competitive because they've got some good seamers, some very good seamers who've gone very well at the IPL. And I'll come on to their star players, but there are a number of them as well later in the piece. I think if you're looking for value in this tournament and you don't want to take one of the 2 favourites, you could do a lot worse than back Asia Cup champions Sri Lanka. That Asia Cup was only last month, so that's recent enough form.
So yeah, for those who want to get on with the pick straight away, it is Australia and it is Sri Lanka. But we're talking about Australia now, and they are one of your outright picks. It's a 3-unit pick, at generally 3-1 to win the World Cup. Well, what do you like about Australia then? I mean, I know that they're obviously home advantage. How important is that going to be? Tell us a bit about their best players and basically why they're going to win it.
Well, I think home advantage is key. I will say that much. I mean, if you think back in history, there isn't really much on home advantage. There isn't a home team that's won this tournament yet. But Australia is different, isn't it? Because it's such a massive country. So I think they'll be used to all the flying around and things, whereas some of the other sides, England in particular, you know, if you're doing that Perth trip and back, I think that's something like a 5-hour time zone different, 5-hour flight, sorry, and going through a different time zone takes a little bit of getting used to. So whereas in England, you know, if you fly for 5 hours, you're in New York, aren't you? So it's a big thing. I don't think it's everything home advantage, but I do think it's significant here because the pace and the bounce in these pitches is probably unique to everywhere else, maybe bar South Africa. But South Africa hasn't hosted this tournament since the very first one back in 2007. So I do think that home advantage is significant. The one thing I will say in this tournament, if you're looking for a team that hasn't got a weakness, stop right now because there isn't one. They've all got weaknesses. It's just who can manage their weakness the best. What's Australia's weakness? Well, to me, Australia's weakness is purely the form of two key players. Aaron Finch, their captain, Glenn Maxwell, batsman, all-rounder, call him what you will. However, both have really, really good form when it really matters in World Cups. Aaron Finch had an excellent 50-over World Cup in England a couple of years ago, and Glenn Maxwell always seems to deliver, regardless of which World Cup it is. So I think in terms of their weakness, I think they can manage that. I also think if Maxwell doesn't catch fire, they've got other options that can come into the side. Finch is a bit more of an issue, but as I say, generally he comes pretty good. I don't see a weakness apart from that. So I always think in these tournaments, it's all about how bad your weakness is as opposed to how good your strengths are. And Australia's weakness isn't that bad. You look at their batting depth, I think you've got the squad up there.
Yeah, I've got the squad up there now. And it's, I mean, I would say it's a fairly old squad, isn't it? I mean, experience can be quite important in cricket, it must be said. And, you know, there's a lot of proven reliable quality here. The group they're actually in, what are the other three teams that are already confirmed in that group?
So you've got England, New Zealand and Afghanistan in that group already. I think the thing that you need to look at for Australia, Steve, they won the tournament last year. Are they better now? I believe they are. And the reason why I believe they're better now is they've got Tim David, who's going to bat at number 6. He's probably the leading finisher in world cricket at the minute. He's having a sensational year. He obviously went well in the T20 Blast for Lancashire, very well in the 100 and played in the CPL, and he's now got his chance for Australia, previously a Singapore international, but he's going to bat at 6. Had an excellent IPL as well, good big bash, and I think he strengthens them to the extent, Steve, that Steve Smith, probably one of the best batters in all formats in the world, isn't likely to get in the starting lineup for this side.
Amazing.
So
that's astonishing, isn't it?
They are as strong as they get, I think, in terms of batting depth. Then you look at the bowlers. Mitchell Stark's been a brilliant white ball bowler forever and a day. Josh Hazlewood has really come to the party in T20s this year. I'll come on to that later. Pat Cummins, arguably the best bowler in the world, certainly in Test cricket, is the best bowler in the world. And Adam Zampa, a very good spinner. I guess you could argue that they'll use a part-timer for their 5th bowler, but it just doesn't seem to count against them. I think they're the team to beat.
They do look very strong, and like I say, they are one of your 2 outright picks to win the Cricket World Cup at 3-1. 3-unit selection there on Australia, straight on the nose. We're going to move on. We're going to move on now to England, who are a general similar price actually to Australia. They can get a little bit more. 7-2 shot on them on a couple of places here, bet 365. England are the second favourites. They're in the same group as Australia, like we said. How do you see them going? They are the defending 50-over world champions. And, of course, England have won this T20 World Cup before. Do you see them going well?
I do. Whether they win the tournament or not would rely on their death bowling. Think back to the last 2 T20 World Cups. They had the 2016 one in the palm of their hands. And then Ben Stokes bowled that over. Carlos Brathwaite smashed all around India. And then last year, England looked absolute $1 million in that tournament. They were the favourites going into it. They demolished Australia in the group stage. They absolutely blitzed that group stage, but their death bowling found them out in the semi-final against New Zealand. That is the issue for England. Have they got a death bowler? Chris Jordan's coming back from injury. He's probably England's recognised death bowler. He's only just come back from injury. He played one game in Australia in the lead up to this series. He's been out since August, so you've got to think he's rusty. Who else is going to bowl at the death? Well, Sam Curran has done it recently. If he has a good tournament, England can have a good tournament. But if he doesn't, and England are found wanting at the death, you just worry in a semi-final if they're defending a score, particularly at somewhere like Adelaide. One of the semi-finals is at Adelaide. If they're defending a score, those square boundaries could get peppered, and you just fear for them in that regard. That would be my big doubt of the
Do
two.
they need to be chasing, do you think, in matches?
Yeah, I think most teams are going to chase in this tournament, Steve. I think it'll be a chasing tournament because I don't think the pitches are going to change. A lot of matches in this tournament, certainly in the early stage of it, are double headers, but I don't think the pitch is going to change too much. But yeah, I think most teams in this tournament will want to chase, but England definitely will want to chase because the death bowling is just not as reliable as they want it to be. If you're asking me or looking for reasons to back England over Australia or not to back England over Australia, I'd say the difference between the two is likely to be the death bowling.
And I'm just looking at the squad now. There's a lot of Yorkshire Viking players in there, which is, from a Yorkshire perspective, very good. And Johnny Bairstow, of course, would have been in the squad as well. So, I mean, how big a loss is Bairstow in T20 cricket for England? He's had a great year.
Yeah, he is, but he's replaceable. Another Yorkshire player that you've just met, Harry Brook, will replace him. I think he's one of the most talented players England have produced in a long time. England's batting is very much their strength. There is a good chance that someone like a David Willey, who has opened the batting in county cricket, certainly bats 3 for Yorkshire, he could come in at 9 in this England side. So they don't lack for batting, which is another reason why they want to chase. But again, it's all about the death bowling for me. However, they can eliminate the death bowling problem if they take wickets up front. And you look at the bowling options there: Reece Topley, David Willey himself, Chris Wokes, Mark Wood. They're all wicket-taking bowlers. They'll all bowl well on Australian conditions, but they will need to take early wickets because if they don't, it could be carnage at the end.
Okay, let's move on to India then. At India, you can get them at 4-1 as a top price. I'm not actually entirely sure of their history in this competition. They've definitely won it at least once, I do believe. Might be even twice. But I would imagine most of their success has come in the subcontinent in these competitions. In Australian conditions, are India the sort of side that you want to be backing? And do they deserve to be the third favourites?
They would be deserved third favourites, but for one significant absence from their squad, Jasprit Bumrah, the best bowler in the world in T20 cricket, certainly at the death, is injured. He's not in the squad no more, and that's going to completely change the way India have to play their cricket. They are going to have to go gung-ho with the bat. They do not have the bowling resources to cope with the absence of Bumrah. Bumrah is an absolute stud at the end. He will always bowl 2 overs at the end of an innings. He's so hard to get away. He takes wickets. He restricts sides. And that if there was one player that India couldn't afford to lose, it's not Virat Kohli. It's not anyone like that. It is Bumrah, and they have lost him. So that is a massive, massive thing.
Is he the best British bowler in this format or in every format, in your opinion?
Oh, he's certainly the best bowler in this format. Yeah, and he's probably run Cummins close.
In the whole world,
yeah,
basically.
He's probably run Cummins close.
So it's a massive loss.
Yeah, he almost won India a test match in England, didn't he, earlier in the year, single-handedly. So he's an absolute huge loss. Some bowlers, because of the way they bowl, you can cover them. But Bumrah, because of when he bowls his overs, he's just irreplaceable for India.
Yeah, so I say 4-1 shot. What is to like about India, though? I mean, they've got a good batsman.
Yeah, their batting is a lot to like. I mean, you could argue that they're a batsman light, but that's just the way they play the cricket. But they're going to have to go in with an extra batter here. They're probably going to go in with an all-rounder to try and cover that absence of Bumrah. So they're going to have the likes of Hardik Pandya in the side. He may well bat 5. Axar Patel could bat 7. The other one that they're missing is Ravi Jadeja. He's also out injured. He's another big loss because he's what I call a 3-dimensional cricketer, Steve, in that he bats, he bowls, and he's a good fielder. And there aren't many of those in the world. If you think of around the first two countries that we've already mentioned. You've got Ben Stokes and Glenn Maxwell who do that, but there aren't really too many. And when you're missing those kind of cricketers, you can replace one facet of what they do. So hard to replace all three. So no Bumrah, no Jadeja is a big thing. They're still good at batting. They've still got arguably the three best white ball batters in the world in Rishabh Pant, Surya Kumar Yadav, and Rohit Sharma. KL Rahul will also be in that mix. Virat Kohli, obviously. This is the last dance with Virat Kohli in the T20 World Cup, I would imagine, given that the next one's 2 years away. But you have to wonder, a lot of India's success, as you mentioned, in the subcontinent is where the wickets kind of spin. You're not going to get much in terms of spin here. You're certainly not going to get much in terms of spin with finger spinners, which is what India are going to largely go in with. So I worry about their bowling, but they do have the batting to cope with that. But again, in a semi-final, if they're batting first, that bowling could be an issue.
We're going to move on to South Africa now, who are a much bigger price outright, 8-1 outright. Funny you mention three-dimensional cricketers there. I think I'm a one-dimensional cricketer when I play at village level. I can bat. I can't really bowl. I certainly can't field, or I hate fielding. So three-dimensional cricketers, they are invaluable. But South Africa then, what an interesting side. Whenever we talk about them, I think in any form of cricket, they can be brilliant or they can be awful. And I actually read an article recently. It was entitled, "They've got 100 problems heading into this Cricket World Cup." Is it as bad as that, or is that just, or have they got a good chance in this World Cup? Because they're not the sort of side who rely on spin, unlike some other teams. So maybe conditions in Australia might suit them. I don't know what you think.
Certainly suits their bowling attack, that is absolutely sure. I mean, in Kagiso Rabada and Anrik Nortje, they've got two of the fastest bowlers in the world. Obviously, Nortje, when he was in England in the summer, he was sending rockets down at 95 mile an hour. He was quick. He'll be even quicker here. Rabada's equally as quick. The problem probably then is after those two. There isn't really a great deal else. And Ngidi can be very hit or miss. Then you've got the spinners, Shamsi. Dwayne Pretorius, probably a big injury for them. He damaged something in India recently. That might bring Marco Jansen into the side. I don't necessarily mind that for the bowling, but Pretorius could have given them an extra bit of batting depth. My big problem with South Africa, though, Steve, is their captain, Temba Bavuma. One, it's very questionable whether he should be in the side. South Africa are having their first season of a T20 franchise league from January. There's 6 teams out there. They've done a draft, and despite being the South African captain, he didn't get drafted for any of the 6 sides. So effectively,
that's a bit embarrassing, isn't it?
Absolutely. So effectively, the teams are saying if you say that each squad's got, say, 8 batters, those squads are saying that there's 48 better batters than Bavuma in the country and in amongst the overseas slots. So that in itself is a problem. Why it's a problem? Well, South Africa have just been to India for a T20 series. Bavuma played in all 3 matches, didn't make double figures. He then played in the ODIs that followed, didn't make double figures in those either. And he's keeping out Risa Hendricks, who had a brilliant time of it in England earlier in the summer, and he's got something like 5 50s in his last 5 innings in T20 international cricket. However, because neither of them are big hitters, you can't play Bavuma and Hendricks in the same side, or if you do, you're taking out a big hitter in Riley Russo, who has had a year to remember in English domestic cricket, absolutely blasted it to all parts for Somerset, and then did much of the same in the 100 for the Oval Invincibles. He's come back to the fore, Russo. He's a reason why South Africa could win this tournament. But that issue with Bavuma is a massive issue. Is he brave enough, or is someone else brave enough to say, sorry, we're going to have to sit you, we'll get someone else to skip it aside? And David Miller is a perfectly good captain who is in this squad. He captained one of the Caribbean franchises in the CPL to top spot in that competition. He's perfectly good enough to captain. So are they brave enough to sit him and play Risa Hendricks, who is a really good T20 opener? If they are, they've got a chance. If they're not, I don't see them having a chance, because he just eats up too many balls, Bavuma, and I'm not particularly sure he's a great captain anyway. And I've also got worries outside of those 2 main bowlers. If one of them gets injured, South Africa's chances would diminish quite quickly.
Let's just talk about the captaincy, because there might be some watching and thinking, oh, the captain's just a nomination like in football or something. It doesn't really mean an awful lot in some places. But in cricket, this guy, the captain, is making a lot of the decisions. He's setting the field. He's probably setting the batting order. You could argue the coaches and stuff are having an input as well. But the captain, sometimes you could argue, is worth his place just for being a captain. But in this case, you would say perhaps Bavuma is very questionable.
Yeah, particularly in this tournament, in this format, sorry, Steve, because these decisions are all being made very, very quickly. As I mentioned right at the start, you've got a certain amount of time to bowl your overs, so you can't stand at the top of a bowler's mark and have a 5-minute chat about where he wants his field. By the time you've done that, you've lost a fielder. It's got to come in the circle. Owen Morgan would be a perfect example of a captain who's worth his weight in gold. And there are many captains that we'll come on to who aren't. It is an important thing. I'm not convinced Bavuma's the man. It's certainly, if he wasn't to captain them and David Miller was, I don't think it's too much of a captaincy downgrade.
The other thing with South Africa, I mean, the group they're in, it's India, Pakistan, is it New Zealand as well?
India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, isn't it?
Bangladesh, and then obviously a couple of others will come from Group A and B. South Africa, I don't believe have ever won an ICC tournament that I could remember. So they've always got that mental baggage on their back. I remember before England won the 50-over World Cup, it was always said, oh, they've never won it. And just to get over that line, they've been known in the past to choke at crucial times. And I guess that's something you then always want when you're backing a team.
I think this is a younger South Africa side, so that wouldn't bother me quite as much. They're far enough away from home as well that it won't mention. I mean, this is a side that's that good that DeWalt Brevis, supposedly the next AB de Villiers, can't even get in this squad. But they've got the likes of Tristan Stubbs, who is a really exciting, explosive batter. I've just mentioned Radu Russo. And then you've got a little bit of experience in David Miller and Quinton de Kock. They've got a good blend of players. As I say, I just worry about that captaincy situation, Bavuma's form in particular. And if one of those seamers goes down, if one of Rabada or Nortje can't play this entire tournament, you can scrub South Africa off your list.
So let's move on to Pakistan, who are slightly bigger price than South Africa in general. 10-1 you can get on them to win this T20 World Cup. Always a bit of an enigma of a team, Pakistan. Do have some quality players, known for producing some fantastic matches, but also suffering some crazy defeats. So Pakistan, how do you assess them heading into this tournament?
I wouldn't put anyone off back in Pakistan, Steve. I wouldn't. I think they're a fair price. They've got a massive issue, which I'll come on to in a minute. But let's go through their strengths. Their strengths: the opening batsman, Mohammad Rizwan, Babar Azam. You could make a genuine case for Babar Azam right now being the best player in the world in all formats, since it's an easy case to make, actually. The problem that they've got is those two are so dominant in this Pakistan side that if one or two fail at the same time, you just wonder what there is left to come after them. If you think back to a series that they had with England over the last month or so, there was a game, it was the second game. England set Pakistan 200 to win. These two chased it down without losing a wicket. 200, happy days. 2 games later on, England set Pakistan 211-ish in that ballpark. The 2 openers didn't get them off to the flyer and they got nowhere near. And that kind of tells you 2 very similar run chases. They need their openers. Now, I oppose Pakistan an awful lot based on the fact that the openers can't keep on doing it. But they do keep on doing it, actually. One averages over 50 in this format of the game. And the other one, Babar Azam, he probably would average over 50 if he's not the first one to get on with the scoring. The other positive for Pakistan is they've just won a tri-series in New Zealand on Friday. New Zealand, Bangladesh and Pakistan. And Pakistan beat New Zealand in New Zealand conditions in the final, where the openers didn't get as many as maybe you thought they would. If their middle order can come to the party, and that is definitely their weakness, the middle order, then Pakistan are a big threat here. But the other problem I've got is at number 3, they've got Shan Masood at number 3. He's an opening batter. Now, if the 2 openers do go well, let's say the 2 openers bat 10 or 12 overs, you don't want Shan Masood coming in, but Pakistan aren't particularly flexible with their batting lineup, so he could undo an awful lot of their good work. But where they are going to be strong is with the ball. You mentioned it. They've got Harris Ralph, probably second to Bumrah for death bowling in the world, who's got a very good record in Australia and the Big Bash. He plays for the Melbourne Stars, so he'll know all about conditions. They've got pace. They've got real fire with the ball. Hasnain's very, very quick. Nazim Shah's also very quick. And they've got spinners. I don't know how important spin's going to be in this tournament. I don't think it'll be as important as it was last year in the UAE. But I think you still need spinners just to keep teams honest, particularly against players who don't play spin particularly well. They tick every box. But if Pakistan are going to win this tournament, their openers have to be among the players of the tournament.
It basically sounds to me, to put it simply, they've got certainly two very, very good batsmen, two of the best in the world in this format. I mean, Babar Azam's one of the best in the world, full stop, I'll say. And then bowling, probably the same thing, probably two of the best bowlers in this format. It's like the overall depth, certainly middle order, maybe a backup bowler is slightly the weakness. But if the big boys fire, if the big names fire, they're as close to unstoppable as you might be able to get.
Yeah, if Rizwan and Azam, who are 1 and 2 in the world on the ICC rankings, make of that what you will, with the bat. If those two fire, if Shadab Khan has a good tournament and Haris Rauf has a good tournament, Pakistan can win this. If Haris Rauf gets injured along the way, that will really stretch their resources. Of course, we've not mentioned Shaheen Afridi, who returns from injury for this tournament. Hasn't played a game since playing for Middlesex earlier in the summer. I think it was June or July. Picked up an injury. Hasn't played a game since then, but he is in the squad for this tournament. Now, if he comes back and he's fully fit, he is one of the best bowlers in the world. He is quick. He's got a devastating Yorker. He can bowl at the start and at the end of an innings, but we haven't seen him. So we are taking pot luck on what sort of form he's in. If he's in good form, he'll bolster a very good Pakistan bowling attack. If he isn't, there's an awful lot on Haris Rauf's shoulders.
Let's talk a little bit about the formats after. Obviously, we've got Group A and B of the two qualifying groups, and then we've got the two main groups. How many qualify from the main groups? Do we got quarterfinals, semi-finals, or it's straight to the semis?
Yeah, no, straight to the semis. Top two qualify.
Right, top two only. So
I think it's Group 1 and Group 2, they call it in the next round, don't they? So the winner of Group 1 plays the runner-up of Group 2, and runner-up of Group 1 plays the winner of Group 2.
Right, okay. So that's Pakistan for you. Interesting side, I must say. Very interesting side. If you're like a neutral in the world who don't know much about cricket, I think you could do worse than actually kind of supporting Pakistan. They'll give you a lot of ups and downs, won't they? So let's move on to New Zealand, who, of course, not located far in the world from Australia. How different are conditions compared to Australia and New Zealand, though? Will it suit them here?
I don't think so, but I have to say before I go into New Zealand, Steve, this is the team that's giving me the most aggro when assessing all of these sides.
Really?
I can't make up my mind about them. They could either be brilliant or they could be terrible, and I'm not overly sure.
Squad.
The one thing we should say, the last 50 over World Cup, the last two 50 over World Cups, New Zealand were the finalists. The last 20 over World Cup, New Zealand were the finalists. You mentioned about South Africa and their record of choking in ICC events. New Zealand are the opposite. They always outperform themselves in ICC events. However, we can only bet on the here and now, can't we? So, question marks over New Zealand. Kane Williamson has not been in form for the best part of a year. The whole world knows that he's got a problem with his elbow. He manages it. He misses many a match for New Zealand. He even missed some of the IPL because of this elbow injury. Players from New Zealand don't miss the IPL if they don't need to because the cash is so much better. So that's a big problem. He's the captain of New Zealand. He's actually a very good captain, arguably the best captain in the world now that Owen Morgan's retired. So that in itself is a problem, but he's still got to hold his weight in runs. He's going to bat at number 3 for New Zealand. I don't like that anyway, particularly as they want to play Devon Conway. I don't think a team in this tournament can win a tournament with two, what you would call glue batsmen. What I mean by that is they're players who find the gaps. They score runs. They're solid enough scoring runs, but they'll probably get you 40 or 30, 32 balls, as opposed to the real crackerjack batsmen that are going to get you 40 or 15, 20 balls. That's the difference in this tournament. I don't think you can have two of those glue-like players and be successful in this tournament. I also don't think New Zealand know their best team. And I think one of the reasons for that is because they've got too many seam bowlers, but they like to play two spinners. So getting them all in is going to be a problem. Lockie Ferguson's been out injured. He's probably their quickest bowler, although Adam Milne's very good and he's been playing recently. They've got Trent Boult, they've got Tim Southey. Those two are reliable as they come. But their record in Australia, they haven't beaten Australia in a bilateral series for yonks.
They do struggle there, don't they? I've like really rarely have I ever seen them even win a game there. I remember there was a time we were actually on them in a match at Hobart, I do believe, and they won by like 10 runs in a test match. That's about the only win I can ever really remember of note that they had over there.
And you're going back a dozen years or so for that. They've played an ODI series. I say at the start of this Australian summer, it was probably the start of the spring. They got beaten in that. There's something about Australia that they don't register well in. If you think back to the the 50 over World Cup in 2015, they lost to Australia in the final. But a lot of New Zealand's matches were actually in New Zealand. They shared the tournament with Australia. It was only when they got to Australia did they struggle. That would be my concern. Why is that a concern? And why do they struggle in Australia as opposed to New Zealand? 2 reasons. The ball nips around an awful lot in New Zealand. They often leave a bit of grass on the pitch in New Zealand. It's a little bit slower. So the ball does a little bit for their skillful bowlers. Doesn't do anything in Australia. And the other thing, size of the grounds in New Zealand. You can miss hit a ball for 6 in New Zealand. You cannot miss hit a ball for 6.
Even I could hit a 6 in New Zealand, I reckon.
You absolutely
and
could.
I don't hit many.
Yeah. And you can't. And with the best will in the world, unless you've got a hurricane behind you and clobber it right out the middle, you're going to struggle to hit a 6 in Australia. So that's the difference, mate.
Yeah.
And I don't think they have enough power hitters anyway. They'll probably prove me wrong like they always do, but not enough batting power for my liking.
It's just interesting looking at the odds here. You can get them at a standout 11-1, but a lot of bookmakers have South Africa, Pakistan, New Zealand at similar odds, or even the exact same odds. Now, this is obviously not an official pick, but if you had to choose one of those 3 to back as an outright, which of those 3 teams would you go with?
South Africa, I would go with. I like their batting depth. I think they've got 2 world-class bowlers, and it's more about the players that's not in their squad as opposed to anything else. And also, of course, South Africa, and I think that India, Pakistan, South Africa, Bangladesh group, that's the easier group. I'll come on to why when we do those groups next week.
Okay, let's move on to Sri Lanka then. And we know that as you said at the start of the show here, they are your second outright pick to win the T20 Cup. This is only a half a unit each way selection, and the each way terms it's at 25-1, half of the odds. So if they make the final, you're basically going to be cashing at least a 12.5-1 winner on this pick. So Sri Lanka, they've got a different route to go through if they're going to win this tournament. They are in one of the qualifying groups, Group A. We've got a separate preview show on that group, so check out that video or that podcast or whatever. But Sri Lanka in general, then, assess them and explain why you think they're a bit of a dark horse here and worth a small bet on.
Asian teams primarily are known for their spinners, aren't they? You could probably say Sri Lanka are. In Wanindu Hasaranga, they've got the best spinner in the world. Everyone will tell you Rashid Khan's that. But teams are playing Rashid Khan out. I'll come on to them in a minute when we do Afghanistan. For me, Wanindu Hasaranga is the best spinner in the world at the minute. And his record in Australia is absolutely fantastic, which is important. But what they also have, and what we saw at the start of the T20 World Cup last year, is they have a growing number of seamers in their side. Dushmanta Chamira has played in the IPL this season. He's a very, very quick bowler. Very, very accurate. Bowls at the start, bowls at the depth. They've got Lahiru Kamara, probably even quicker than that. And again, who isn't in the squad? They've got bowler Bilhara Fernando, who's not in their squad, who was fantastic last year. The reason he's not in the squad is 2 others have emerged who played in the Indian Premier League for Chennai Super Kings, who are very, very good themselves. They've also got a couple of canny all-rounders. What I like about this Sri Lanka side, though, they've got some fire with the bat. If you go back 15-ish years, Sri Lanka were real one-day kings, weren't they?
Sanaf Jayasuriya and so forth, yeah.
Jayasuriya and Dilshan got them off
yeah.
to flyers, and then they got real class batsmen in Sangakkara and Jayawardena. It's very similar forming now. They've got solid batsman in Pathum Nissanka, who will be a feature when we do this particular group later in the competition. But they've also got a little bit of firepower down there as well. Charith Asalanka had a brilliant tournament last year. Really, really came out. And they've also got, and apologies to anyone who's Sri Lankan, my pronunciations of these names are
not easy, are they? I must say.
They're going to be insulting, but I don't mean to insult you. But you've got Banuka Ratchapaksa, who went very, very well for
Would
the
that
Kings
not be Raha Pakska?
Yeah, I'll leave that one to you, mate. That's absolutely fine. He went very well for the Punjab Kings in the IPL anyway, to the point that at one stage he was keeping Johnny Bairstow out the side. He has got serious fire in his bat. And then you've got the likes of Hasaranga, who can also come in and give it a bit of pasty. I actually think the fact that Sri Lanka have got to go through the qualifying group is a positive. There's one or two players there that are a little light on competitive reps recently, so hopefully they're going to get 3 games there to build up the fitness. There is no way in the world Sri Lanka don't come out of that group.
If they win the group, now you're thinking they're going to probably win the group. If they do, which group will they then go in?
The England group, which is a negative,
right.
But it's only a slight. It's only a slight negative. I just think they've got a bowling attack that will go well in Australia. As I mentioned at the start, they played a T20 series in Australia at the start of the year. They only lost it 3-1 with a tie, but 2 of the others could have gone the other way. So in essence, they could have won that 3-1 with a tie. That was just a matter of weeks after Australia won the T20 World Cup in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. They're the Asia Cup champions. They won that tournament really, really well, with lots of high scoring, with pretty good bowling, and they were without Chamira in that tournament. He comes back for this one. I can see them having a good tournament. I think at the prices, they're worth burning a unit just to see how well they go. I mean, like you say, if they come runners up and they're in the other group, then happy days.
Yeah, they are a big price, 25 to 1 in general. That's plus 2,500 in American odds. And if they do qualify from the original group, as we think, get into the main group, all you need to do is then get in them top 2 and you're in the semi-finals. And if you can get in the semi-final, if you've got a 25 to 1 shot in the semi-finals, you can even think about cashing out a bit then, in fairness. So interesting little court, 0.5, half a unit each way on Sri Lanka. Obviously, I know some bookmakers around the world, you're not going to be able to get an each way bet on them. You're going to have to be straight on the nose. Even then, though, if they do qualify, you can start laying off and cashing out in other ways as well. So interesting little outsider pick there on Sri Lanka. We're going to move on to the West Indies now, who are also going to have to qualify for the main groups. And we're going to talk about them in our Group B preview. Check that video out. But West Indies, bigger price than Sri Lanka, as big as 70 to 1. I don't even think that's accurate, but you can certainly get 50 to 1 on them in certain places. Now, I mean, when I think of West Indies, just as a stereotypical cricket fan here, I'm thinking big hitters, I'm thinking temperamental bowlers, and I'm thinking lazy fielding. How accurate am I about this squad?
Yeah, you are accurate. You're very accurate, and I think that's partly their downfall. I think the team that wins this tournament is going to field well. I think that's, they're covering vast areas of space in the field. You have to attack the ball. You have to get the ball in accurately. No fumbles or anything like that. Batsmen are going to be pushing for 2 runs each time they hit into the outfield. That's how big these outfields are. And if you keep on coughing up 2 runs, then ultimately, 2 runs a ball, that's going to be, you're chasing 240. You're not favourites to chase that. The big problem, like you say, they're all power batsmen. But these grounds are big. They are huge grounds. And okay, they'll play their initial group at Hobart, which isn't a big ground. But if they win that group, they'll have a game in Melbourne, a game in Brisbane, and a game in Adelaide, where if the bowling's proper, they are big grounds. And even if they come second, they've got 2 in Melbourne, 1 in Brisbane and 1 in Adelaide. So they are not going to be able to rely on hitting sixes to win this tournament. This is not the 2016 version that they won in India, where they absolutely smashed everything out of the ground, where again mishits would go for 6. It's just not going to happen here. And I don't think they're a side anywhere near as strong as that 2016 one was anyway.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of batting and bowling, which is their best aspect?
I think you'd say they're batting, because if they do come off in an innings, then they could go really big. The problem is they're not going to come off anywhere near enough. Their death bowling, they have one specialist death bowler, but if you get after him, the rest of them aren't much. The one thing you would say about West Indies, if you wanted to follow West Indies or you're a fan of West Indies, they played Australia in a T20 series a couple of weeks ago, just before the one that Australia played with England. In fact, I think it was the middle of last week. They lost it 2-0, but they were competitive in both matches. They weren't absolutely slaughtered like they could have been. However, the flip side of that is Australia just come back from India, so they were still readjusting to conditions themselves. There's some good batsmen in this West Indies side, but the problem they've got is their running between the wickets is terrible. They will not turn ones into twos. They'll try and hit everything for 4 and 6. And against the better sides in this competition, they're not going to do it. Not on these grounds. And the other problem they've got, there's no Sunil Narayan in this squad. There's no Kieran Pollard. There's no Dwayne Bravo. There's no Andre Russell. It's a lot of experience, but it's also a lot of very, very, very reliable bowling. They're a young bowling attack. They've got some good pace bowlers, Azari Joseph, Obed McCoy, that I'll come on to in a minute. But I don't think they've got enough.
Yeah, West Indies. They sounds like I belong in that team in terms of their running. I'd quite enjoy batting with guys that only want a single. So let's move on to our final team that we're talking about in this preview. And that is Afghanistan. They're a big price. I'm not even sure how accurate this 150 to 1 is. They're as short as 33 to 1 with Unibet. Obviously, they see something in them. But in general, they're a pretty big price to win this World Cup. But they have qualified automatically for this tournament due to their previous exploits. And I mean, I'm guessing it will be a struggle for Afghanistan, won't it? But they're not maybe the mugs that people might hear. Oh, Afghanistan, they're not going to be any good at cricket. But they're not complete mugs, are they?
No. This is a tournament too soon. In 2 years' time in the West Indies, they'll be genuine runners. The problem that they've got is they are so heavily reliant on spin. That's not necessarily a bad thing when your spinners are Rashid Khan, Mujib, Mohammed Nabi, to name but 3. I think Case Ahmed's in their squad as well. He's had a really good season at Kent, a couple of seasons at Kent actually. But the problem is these pitches, they're not going to spin very much. Maybe later on in the tournament, but Afghanistan have got to get there first. The one thing you would say about spinners is they're in the game in terms of teams aren't going to be able to bash them for 6. You know, a lot of the grounds in world cricket, spinners aren't quite as good as maybe they could be, because the outfields are so small that teams can miss hit the ball for 6. That's not the case here. So the spinners could get a lot of batsmen caught on the boundary. The flip side of that is teams can milk these spinners into the gaps, get 1s, get 2s, and build their score up that way. And that's what they'll do against the likes of Rashid Khan, Mujib. Mujib, to be fair, has a really good Big Bash record. But even in a Big Bash, Rashid Khan's starting to get played out for sides. Sides would be quite happy if Rashid Khan, who's ranked the best bowler in the world in this format, I don't necessarily see it, but fair enough. Teams are quite happy if he takes no wickets and only goes for 20 runs, because they know at the other end they'll be able to catch up with the runs that they've lost out on. What they don't want is Rashid Khan to bowl his 4 overs, take 4 wickets for 25 runs or something like that. That's no good to anyone. So they're quite happy to just defend, get the runs that they can get, and then score off the other bowlers. And if he doesn't find a way of taking wickets, I just worry for Afghanistan, particularly if they're relying on their seamers to take wickets. Now, Naveen Ul-Haq is very much improved. He's had 2 fantastic seasons for Leicestershire in the T20 Blast, and he also went well in the Caribbean Premier League last year. But I just don't think he can do it on his own. The one thing Afghanistan do have is they have an exciting batting lineup. I just think it's a tournament too soon, Steve. I think 2 years' time, if we do this preview again, Afghanistan will be a lot higher on my radar. But right now, they're probably a little bit too inexperienced with the bat and too reliant on spin in a country that spin isn't to be relied on.
I'm sure we'll talk about them a bit more in detail next week when we go into their team bets. But just one thing I noticed there on the squad list, Jonathan Trott, the former England player, is the coach for them. I didn't actually know that. I hope they're not going to bat like he did.
He's only recently taken over because it was Graham Thorpe who was the coach, wasn't it? But he come down with a and had nasty illness in the summer, and he had to quit. So Jonathan Trotz, he's quite new. If you're using Afghanistan as a form guide, you would have said they'll have gone better at the Asia Cup than they will here. They only made the group stage of the Asia Cup. They didn't make the final. So
you don't see them coming out of the group, do you?
Tournament too soon. I don't see them coming out of England's group. If they were in the other group, maybe you could have made more of a case. Yeah. But I think the three sides in England's group are all much better suited to these conditions.
Sounds like they're a big price for a reason. Okay, well, we're going to now talk about the top batsman market. And this is an interesting market. What we've got to say is this is the top tournament run scorer, and it starts right from game one. So the qualifying groups are included in this. So, you got your teams like your England, your Australias and that. They're coming in obviously a week later. All these other teams are going to be playing 3 games. So say a West Indies batsman went crazy, bagged himself 3 tons in the 3 group games and they qualified, they're going to have another extra 3 games to win this market. So it will be, the bookmakers are not daft. They will have suitably priced it up as such. But this top batsman market, Kev, you've actually got a couple of top batsman picks, but just talk us through some of the 2 or 3 big names that people might be looking out for and how you think they'll get on.
Yeah, I actually think that this market is quite reflective of the chances. I mean, you've got Babar Azam and Rizwan at the top, haven't you? The rankings have them as 1 and 2. They've just gone well in New Zealand. They're genuine chances. They are. There's no getting away from that. But they're also a short price. You've just mentioned the sort of quirk of this tournament. Last year, I had a field day on this because bookmakers didn't appreciate the impact that early group stage could make, and priced everyone in the same sort of bracket. Here, it's a little bit different. There's a lot of West Indies and Sri Lanka batsmen higher up in the market. They're expected to dominate those groups. We'll come on to those in another podcast, like you said. As opposed to the ones right at the very top, it's a fair market. I mean, you look at Josh Butler, market. Just looking at Josh Butler there, he led the way in the IPL run scoring, would have led the way in the 100 run scoring, but for his injury in amongst that. David Warner's a regular top scorer in the IPL. KR Rahul also. Rizwan and Azam would be, but they're not allowed in it because obviously India and Pakistan relations aren't particularly great. Rather than look at the market though, Steve, I'd rather look at what you need to look for in terms of you need to whittle this field down, I think. There's 16 teams in this tournament, so effectively you've got 100 batters. Okay, you can get rid of 4 of the teams straight away because they're not of the level of the rest of them. So let's say you've got 70 batsmen, so you can't be looking at a 70-man market. So whittle the field down a bit. So how can you do that? Well, first of all, you can whittle it down by batting position. For example, there will be the odd time in this tournament where someone at 6 scores a 50. But you've got a maximum of 8 innings in this tournament, maybe 9 or 10 in Sri Lanka's case if they get to the final and win it, like I think they could do. You've got a maximum of 10 innings. Now, your number 6 is going to bat probably no more than half of those if you do it right. And certainly in some of those, he's only going to bat for a few balls. He's not going to bat for many balls. So you can pretty much take out anyone 6 and below. So you then focus on the top 5. Again, the man who's coming in at number 5, he's only really going to get proper innings. And what I mean by proper innings is time to build his innings, so play himself in before he has to go and start taking risks. He's only probably going to get that if a team absolutely messes up the power play, by which time he's under pressure anyway, or he's up against a good side who are bowling really, really well. So I'm a little bit reluctant to take him. If he comes in any other time, he's slogging from the first ball, so he's only going to get a small score anyway. So I think you have to take someone in the top 4. That's an absolute certainty. I think this tournament's going to be a new ball tournament. I think the power play is going to be big. So I would look for someone probably in the top 3 if possible, but certainly no lower than 4. And now all of a sudden you've got yourself a 25, 30-man market and you can start picking from there. The other thing to look for, don't pick someone who's only going to play 5 group games. You're not going to win this market in 5 matches when someone could potentially be playing 10. The finalist will definitely be playing 7. You're not going to do that. So anyone from sort of teams that I've ruled out. So you're looking at New Zealand,
Afghanistan, yeah.
New Zealand, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, we've not mentioned, but you can include them as well. No point in them. Now all of a sudden you're down to sort of 15 or 20, and then you can make your selections.
I suddenly realised Bangladesh are a complete oversight here. They should have been on this show. We'll have to talk about them next week. It's too late now. I've done the schedule. So Bangladesh fans, I do apologise. But
if you do want a quick line on Bangladesh, read Afghanistan without the spinners.
Yeah. So I don't know how I've got that one wrong, but let's move on to your two top back picks then. Kev, you've got an Indian batsman and you've got an English batsman. Let's start with the Indian batsman. Who is it?
It's Surya Kumar Yadav, Steve, Sky for short. I think he's the most exciting batter in the world right now. I really do. I love watching him. He's absolutely fantastic. He's second in run scoring in T20 internationals this year. Can largely take that with a pinch of salt because not every team in T20 internationals plays their first team. A lot of the time they rested for test matches and ODIs, but it still says something that he's the second highest. He averages just a shade under 40 actually, but he strikes at 170, and that's the thing. Although he bats at number 4, because he strikes so highly, what I mean by that is if he faces 100 balls, he'll score 170 runs on average throughout his career. He's not going to bat 100 balls. So let's say he bats 50, scores 85, happy days. Basically, he gets on with it. Now, you were going to tell me he's Indian, so he's not going to be particularly great in Australian conditions, and that's fair enough. You might have a point, but he's already scored 50 in a warm-up game against Perth, and they're probably the perfect team to judge a warm-up game because the Perth Scorchers are the Big Bash team. They will always either win the Big Bash or they're in the final, and they also play in the toughest conditions in terms of pace and bounce. So he scored a 50 against them in the warm-up earlier in the week. And I don't see any problems whatsoever. He's going to bat at 4 for India. He might even end up batting at 3 if Virat Kohli has a poor tournament. He is Mr. Excitement. I really, really, really like him. You can get sort of 25 to 1 on him at Corals, 4 places. Also, India are in that easy year of the two groups. Every chance they'll get to the semi-final. If they do, he gets an extra match. And if he gets to the final, even better. I really, really like him. I think he's a great player.
Yeah. 25 to 1 each way. That is 4 places. So if he's in the top 4, you'll get a quarter of the odds. What will they be? About 6 to 1 winner. I know there's a lot of bookmakers, maybe people watching across the world. You're not going to be able to get an each way bet on him. So just take him on the nose then for 1 unit. It would be my advice there. I know it's Boyle Sports, I think, are giving 6 places, but only at a fifth of the odds. But it looks a good price on the team that might potentially, go quite deep. So Surya Kumar Yadav, the top tournament batsman. That's your first one. Now you're going down to the England team, and who are you picking?
Well, I've referenced the ICC World Rankings a lot in this podcast, and David Malan was top of those in T20 cricket for an awful long time. He fell away earlier in the summer when England bizarrely stopped picking him for some reason. But he's back in the side now. Why is he back in the England side? He's back in the England side because he's the top scorer in the 100. That's England's now flagship domestic T20 tournament. Top scorer for the Trent Rockets. They won the tournament. He was a big reason why they won the tournament. He's back in form and going really well. Probably didn't have the series in Pakistan that he would have wanted. I think that's fair to say. Wasn't terrible in Pakistan, just wasn't particularly quick. But since he's come to Australia, he's caught fire again. Been brilliant in the 2 T20 matches that England, in the second of the T20 matches that England played. That one was in Canberra last week. He scored 80 in no time on a pitch where not really many people got going. Dropped down the order in Perth. That's understandable. He'd had a lot of cricket, others hadn't. They got thrown up above him. He's got a good record in Australia. Played well in the Big Bash for Hobart in the past. Scored test match runs in Australia. Don't actually know why England stopped picking him in Australia early this year when the Ashes were around. But he can play in Australian conditions. In fact, he's probably better in Australian conditions than he would be in Asian conditions, UAE conditions. He didn't have a particularly standout tournament in the World Cup last year. and again that Pakistan series, but those pitches don't suit him anywhere near as much as these ones do. He isn't a big hitter, Steve. He's probably England's least biggest hitter, but he's really improved his strike rate this year. I've seen the statistic. His strike rate has been roughly 110 to 120 in seasons gone past. This year, it's up and over 140. But a lot of that's because of the 100, where there's 20 balls less. But even so, there's a clear intent. You have to hit the ball in this England side, otherwise you don't get into it. So he's done that well. He's also the player that everyone can bat around. And if you want to get really, really technical, every single spinner of any note in England's group is a leg spinner. That means that they'll be turning the ball into the pads of a left-hander. Now, it is an awful lot easier for a batsman to hit the ball with the spin when it's going into their pads than it is the other way, because they're basically batting against the momentum of the ball. Whereas if they're batting with the momentum of the ball, you've obviously immediately got some extra velocity on the shots. I think he's a really good player, David Malan, and I could see him having a really good tournament. England should make the semi-finals. If they do, I would be surprised if he's not there or thereabouts with the run scoring.
What's his batting position nailed on at?
3.
I mean, that
England,
again, high.
Yeah, Butler, Hales, then Malan. I suppose there is the odd chance that Malan will drop down, but it'll only drop down the order if the openers go really, really well, by which case he's not going to top score anyway. So, yeah, Malan for me. I think he's a really, really good player, and also he's a good player in all conditions. So if the ball does do a bit, he's technically sound, whereas someone like Alex Hales, he'll go after the ball and probably get found out a little bit more. And Malan, 40 to 1 at Sporting Index, twice the price of Hales as well.
Yeah, you can get him up 40 to 1 here at Sporting Index, plus 4,000 in American odds. And generally, you can certainly get him at least 25 to 1. You got him each way there, 4 places. Again, that's for 1 unit each way. So if that comes in, it's a really big cash out. And again, if you can't get the each way, just have 1 unit on the nose is what I would advise there. We're going to move into the top tournament bowler market now, Kev. And sometimes this is also known as top wicket taker. So it's basically the bowler who's going to take the most wickets in the whole tournament. Again, starting from the very first match in the Group A and B qualifiers. So, in theory, you could absolutely demolish someone like, I don't know, United Arab Emirates, and you've got a nice little head start in this market, haven't you? Top tournament bowler. So take us through briefly sort of the sort of strategy here for you. Are you really looking at, potentially teams in those first 2 groups, the qualifying groups, and then whereabouts do you really want to be bowling to take wickets?
This time I am, Steve. If you think of the batsman, there are vast differences in the amount of runs that you can get to the amount of wickets you can get. You can only get 10 wickets in a match. You can get 200 runs in a match if you're of that ilk. So the wicket-taking list is always a lot tighter than the run-scoring list. So this time I want every single match I can possibly get. So this time I am going to take someone from those first 2 groups. If you go back to last year, when Indu Hasaranga did exactly what you just said for Sri Lanka, and he ended up as the top wicket taker. Right. Wasn't a surprise. I backed him. Anyone who followed my website, you'll have been on him. 14 to 1 was the top tournament wicket taker. Probably halfway through the second group stage, no one was going to catch him. He's the favourite this time round. And he's the favourite this time round because Sri Lanka have got to go through that same procedure again. However, when taking a look at the Sri Lankans in this market, there is a strong chance that their final game is going to get washed out. The weather forecast for Geelong on that day is not good. Now, we're recording this a week from the time of that, so it might change. But at the time of recording, the forecast for that game is terrible. So we may only get 2 group games as opposed to the 3. Whereas West Indies, their forecast in Hobart looks an awful lot more promising. They're going to get 3 group games, and assuming that they qualify, they'll get 5 more in the group stage. So it's the West Indians that I'll concentrate on for my main bet, Steve. And my main bet is Obed McCoy. The reason why is I want death bowlers in this tournament. And I want death bowlers in this tournament because I don't think spin is going to have as much of a part. I think spin might slow the run scoring down in this tournament, but I don't think they're going to take wickets. Now, in this market, you get nothing for economy rate. You may as well go at 20 and over as opposed to 2 and over, as long as you're taking wickets. And that, funnily enough, is what Obed McCoy does. He's extremely expensive, but he's expensive because he'll bowl an over in the power play. He usually bowls the 6th over for West Indies. And the reason why that's a key over, that's the last over of the power play. Teams will go after that over because it's the last one where they've only got 2 fielders in the deep to worry about. So that's a big over. And then he'll probably bowl, if he doesn't bowl 3 at the death, he'll bowl 1 close to the death and then 2 at the death. So I like him. I think he's a really good bowler anyway. He's got a lot of change of pace. He's a left armer. I don't know why, but they seem to go better than right armers. And he's got a lot going for him. He's also got 3 batting lineups that they're okay against pace, but against the change-ups could be found wanting. So I think he can take some early wickets. And again, I think the change of pace that he can provide, which is a specialist skill, particularly at the death of an innings, can lead him to wickets in the group stage. He's got a good Yorker on him, fairly quick. He's tall. He'll get bounce. And only Jason Holder has taken more T20 wickets than him this year for West Indies, and he's played 4 more matches. So of the 2, I would prefer Obed McCoy. I think he's a decent price. You can get him at 14-1 at William Hill. And
that's another each way, isn't it?
Yeah, it's another each way. 4 places again. His T20 international career, he takes a wicket every 13.1 balls. If you extend that into an innings, it's roughly 2 wickets an innings. If he takes 2 wickets an innings in 8 games in this tournament, that's 16 wickets. That's more than what the winner got last season. So he's going to be right there or thereabouts.
Yeah, definitely. So there you go. Obed McCoy. I think they've actually spelled him wrong here on the odds checker. It's not Obi, is it? Unless he's known that as a nickname. But so that's your first pick. You do have 2 other selections in this top bowler market, and we are looking now at one's actually a massive price, but into Australia now. And who is the Aussie that you're going with for top bowler?
I mean, Australia can't win the tournament if their bowlers don't stand up and be counted. And for me, the one to be on is Josh Hazlewood. Everyone will claim Mitchell Starc as the most important bowler. I don't necessarily see that, though, to be honest. Hazlewood's bowling an awful lot more at the death these days. And also, I think Mitchell Starc needs the ball to swing to be effective. And if it doesn't swing, and I don't think it will swing, particularly this early in the summer, where it's going to be played in cold conditions, particularly in the evenings, and obviously all of Australia's games are at night to maximise viewing figures, he might not be as effective as he normally would. Josh Hazlewood, if you said to me 3 years ago you're going to be backing Josh Hazlewood to be the leading bowler in a white ball tournament, I'd have thought you were crackers. But he's actually really improved, and they had Nathan Lyon on the commentary of the Australia-England game earlier today, and he was actually saying that he was with Josh Hazlewood when he got the phone call in 2019 to say that he wasn't going to the World Cup in England, and he was distraught. And from that moment, he vowed that he was going to improve his white ball cricket. He's improved it to the extent that he was the 5th leading bowler in the IPL this season in a Chennai side that weren't particularly great, and in Indian conditions where spin would be superior to seam. So the fact that he was the 5th leading bowler in that tournament tells you everything that you need to know about his chances back in home conditions where it really, really suits him. In the first T20 against England, he took wickets with a new ball. Sorry, in the second one, I keep calling it the first one. The second one, took wickets with a new ball. He also took wickets against West Indies. He's in fine form. He looks to be bowling really, really well right now. And he's 25-1 at Sporting Index, again with 4 places. And if Australia go well, I just don't see how he doesn't.
If you make the final, they're going to be 7 games for him. So
7 games, yeah. And assuming that West Indies, Sri Lanka, or anyone who come out of that tournament don't make the final, then obviously no one will have more games than him.
Yeah. So it looks a solid pick, 25-1 there. And your final selection is a real long shot here, but you're going down the England route again. Which bowler catches your eye?
Yeah, Sam Curran, actually, Steve. He didn't catch my eye at all. But recently, since he's come back into the England side, he's really bowling quite nicely, actually. He's always had the changes of pace and things to be a good white ball cricketer, but for some reason England have only really played him in Test match cricket. But he has a really good record at Chennai Super Kings, and I think that's significant because there's a lot of good brains trusts in Chennai. MS Dhoni, particularly, probably one of the best white ball cricketers that there's ever been. And obviously Chennai in the IPL are one of the best sides, so they know how to win games. Since he's been in Australia for this tour for England, He's played a couple of games, and he didn't play the third game this morning, which, as luck would have it, was rained out anyway. He took 3 wickets in the first one, took 2 wickets in the other one. That's 5 in 2. He took 7 in 6 games in Pakistan where the pitches don't suit him. I think they suit him more here because he isn't the quickest, but he gets a lot of bounce for some reason, particularly with his bouncer, which is a sharp bouncer. And in these grounds, he can bowl his bouncer because he's not going to get smashed out of the park. A lot of the grounds here have big square boundaries. The ones that have big straight boundaries, well, he's got a decent enough Yorker so he can pitch the ball up. He doesn't need to swing it. There is a caveat here that he's not guaranteed to play for England. But I just can't see them leaving out a bloke who's already taken 5 wickets in 2 games on this tour and who took 7 in 6 on the Pakistan tour. There are an awful lot of injury concerns about England bowlers. Chris Wokes and Mark Wood are still coming back from injury. They're still being managed. They might get rotated. Reece Topley's never fully fit at the best of times. And Chris Jordan's only just coming back from injury, as I mentioned, right back when we mentioned England. So it might be that Sam Curran is the one bowler who doesn't get rotated. And if he isn't, you can get 80 to 1 at 4 places at Bet365. He only needs 1 decent innings. Let's say he takes a 3 or a 4 for against someone and then chips away in the other games, and he could just be there or thereabouts. But if he has a couple of special innings, like he has done in Australia already, then he could easily be there when the wickets are handed out.
It's a big price, like I say, 80 to 1, 4 places there with Bet365. And, if you get him in that top 4, you're looking at a 20 to 1 winner, plus 8,000 on the nose as well. This is only a half unit pick, half unit each way. And, if you were just going to take him straight on the nose, then you would want to be looking just, guess a half unit straight up, really, even a quarter of a unit on this sort of thing. So that concludes the top bowler market. We are now just going to finish with any other outright bets in the tournament, and you've only got one other pick for the rest of it here, Kev. I know there's loads of sort of side markets that you can look at, and but there's only one that you're actually going to take.
Yeah, we'll assess the state of play again ahead of the main tournament starting when we do that podcast next week. But the weather at the minute is so hit or miss. I don't really want to get involved in them, and a lot of the players that I had in those markets will just take for the matches as they come. But there is one, and that is the team to hit the most sixes. So basically here, you're looking across all of the games, add up the sixes of all of the teams, and the one that hits the most wins. West Indies are favourites in this market. That's understandable. They have Nicholas Pooran, Rovman Powell, couple of others. I mean, if you're on social media and you follow any cricket in social media, you'd have seen that 6 that Kyle Mayers hit against Australia last week at up on the Gold Coast, where he literally just stood there and spanked it 110 metres over extra cover. That kind of shows you the quality of West Indies 6 hitting. But this isn't a West Indies side of the past. There's no Chris Gale. There's no Bravo. There's no Pollard. There's no Andre Russell. That's 4 genuine 6 hitters that aren't here. And yes, the likes of Mayers, Johnson Charles, Evan Lewis, Brandon King, Nicholas Pooran can all hit 6s. But as I've mentioned earlier, these grounds aren't massive. You're not gonna smash everything out of the park. And I'm not fully convinced that West Indies are going to go well with the bat. If they do go well in this tournament, I think they'll go well with the ball, not the bat. And I think they're worth taking on. Who do I think they're worth taking on with? I think they're worth taking on with South Africa. The reason why I think they're worth taking on with South Africa is 3 of the 5 games that South Africa play are Adelaide, Perth, Hobart. Hobart's probably the smallest overall circle that they play on. Perth is a rugby ground. The straight boundaries there are ridiculously short if you watch the England game last Sunday. And Adelaide is the other way round. It's a rugby ground or Australian football ground, but the other way round. So long, straight, very short square. So those 3 grounds have all got boundaries that can be targeted. Their other 2 games are in Sydney, which isn't exactly the longest ground in the world either. So they've got 5 potential scoring grounds there. They've also got some really big hitters, South Africa. Now, I mentioned earlier about Bavuma and everything else. But apart from that, they have Quinton de Kock, very clean hitter at the cricket ball. Riley Rousseau, arguably one of the cleanest hitters at cricket ball there is. David Miller, one of the best finishers in world cricket. Tristan Stubbs hits a ball an absolute million miles. And even Aidan Markram or Heinrich Klaassen, whichever one they go with at number 4, can hit a decent cricket ball. I really do think that unless West Indies absolutely pepper Hobart in that first stage, and there's still a bit of weather around in that, so there's no guarantees that they're going to be able to do that, I really do think that they could be worth taking on. South Africa there, as I've said, in their 5 group games, they've got matches on grounds where you can hit sixes. There aren't many grounds in this tournament where you can, but they've got them. And if they get a semi-final on top of that and give you another game, then I think you can see an awful lot of sixes from a South Africa side who have recently bashed 220 in India against a decent Indian side. They scored something like 230 at Bristol against England, which wasn't enough to win the game. They are a big hit inside these days, South Africa, and 18-1 with Bet Victor. You've got to take this on the nose. There's no each way, but it's worth 1 point just in case West Indies do fail or their batters can't clear the ropes as often as they usually would.
It certainly sounds like once they hit a ball, the South Africans, it stays hit big. And it sounds like you need quite a bit of strength in some of these grounds to actually hit sixes. So I do like the reasoning there, Kev. Well, that concludes the outright preview show. We've still got preview show for Group A, Group B. Every single match can be previewed by us as well. So watch out for those. Just want to recap the bets that you've had from this show. Australia to win the T20 World Cup at 3-1. That is a 3-unit play. Sri Lanka to win the T20 World Cup 25-1. That's a half unit to play each way. Top batsman, Surya Kumar Yadav for India, 25-1, 1 unit each way. And David Malan, top tournament batsman, 40-1, another 1 unit each way pick there. And into the top bowler market, Obed McCoy, West Indian, top tournament bowler, 14-1, another 1 unit each way pick. Josh Hazlewood, top tournament bowler, 25-1, 1 unit each way pick. And Sam Curran, top tournament bowler, half a unit each way there at 80-1. And the final outright bet, South Africa most tournament sixes, 18-1. So that concludes this particular show. It's been an absolute pleasure. Kev, if you can follow us on the socials as well, that'd be great. I'll put them on the screen there. 4 different Twitter accounts to follow at ASB Pod, which hasn't had much action in a while. So we need to get that following up for that account. KevSat is your main Twitter account. You've also got KevSat Sports Bets, which is purely any picks and stuff like that come from your site. And of course, you can follow me at Meatman Soccer. And I've listed Kev's site there below on the ticker. It will all be on, if you're watching on YouTube, it will be listed in the comments below. So, Kev, how did you find it? You got through it's an hour and 20 preview show. You're not going to get a better one than this, are you?
You're really not. No, there's something for everyone there, Steve. There's a favourite bet. There's plenty of each way value. There's a couple of real shots in the dark. Whether you're a big punter or just a small stake interest punter, we've got you covered.
Thank you very much for watching. Do give the video a like if you're doing it on YouTube, or a like on Twitter, somewhere like that. Check out the followers. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.